You're listening to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast with Jody Livingston and Chris Trent, episode number 72.
Welcome to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast, helping you survive and thrive in youth ministry. And now, your hosts, Jody Livingston and Chris Trent.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the show today. Thanks for tuning in and listening wherever you are and wherever this finds you. Thanks for making this podcast today a part of your day. If it's your first time checking out the show, welcome. We are glad you are here. And if you are coming back, well, welcome on back. If you enjoy the show, we would love for you to subscribe to the show so you make sure you get it each and every time it comes out. Share it with somebody you like, or I guess if you don't like the show, somebody you don't like. And make sure that you listen to the very end on this one, because it's a good one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man. So what's going on, Jody? That's Jody Livingston doing the marvelous little intro there. I'm Chris Trent. We're a couple youth pastors in the Atlanta area. What do they call it? Is it Dallas, Texas, and Fort Worth is the Metroplex. What is Atlanta? Is it the metropolis?
I hear people say Metro
What?
Atlanta. That's what I hear people say.
Metro Atlanta? Okay.
I don't know what that means.
Yeah, that works. I don't know. Yeah.
Sounds.
Well, we're not at the same church, but we see each other every once in a while in person. But most of the time, he's sitting in his living room. I'm sitting in mine right now. And we still hang out with teenagers. So gearing up for a lot this week, actually. So
because we like them.
Yeah, man.
You can find us all social media stuff at Jody Livingston, JODY, and at Chris Trent, wherever that may land you. Twitter sphere, Instagrams, over on the Facebook at the Longer Haul, and of course the super secret podcast group on Facebook. All the links that we mentioned today and resources you can find on the show notes page, which is thelongerhaul.com/episode 072. It's thelongerhaul.com/episode 072. Also, hey, how about this? We haven't asked for this in a while. If you really are genuinely enjoying the show, you can head over to iTunes or wherever and write and leave a review. We like those, right? You like those?
Yeah, I mean, it would really be a help, just in terms of like when people go on to iTunes and do a search for like youth ministry under podcasts, all that kind of stuff helps. And so, yeah, I mean, if you're willing to jump over there and give us a review, that'd be great. That'd be super helpful. Hey, you know what we have there, Jody, that I love? We have sponsors. We have a sponsor, actually. Well, it's technically sponsors because it's a whole bunch of people that work there that are awesome. And these people here, and this is what I love about our sponsor. Sure, it's an organization. It's a ministry organization that does curriculum and camp and books and all that type of stuff. But what I really love is the fact that it's just this amazing group of people who love teenagers and want to point teenagers to Jesus. And they've been committed to that for a while now. But YM360 over youthministry360.com, they've just got tons of great resources to help you out. Amazing curriculum, quiet time Devo type options. Just some great stuff. So if you're looking for some of that stuff, man, check them out. We love them. And you and I both use a lot of their stuff. So it's good.
And you can save 20% by using the promo code Longer Haul, just because you're special. You're a listener of the Longer Haul podcast, Youth Ministry Podcast. So I don't know, you'll save 20% on camp. I don't think that applies, but everything else probably.
Yep. Yeah, it's good.
Most things. 20% Longer Haul. Use that promo code.
It's good.
Right there. Hey, so today, man, amazing guest, amazing topic. You kind of came and said, hey, we need to have Walt Mueller on to talk about this topic today. What was it about? Like what brought that about?
Yeah. So, what's interesting is Walt just put out an article, and I actually posted it on our Facebook page called Be Soberly Minded or Reminded. And he wrote this article after a lot of the stuff went down up at Willow Creek, which is up in Chicago. And Bill Hybels was the pastor there. and they've been going through a really hard time, and this is not in any way in, us, coming down on Bill Hybels or Willow Creek or any of that type of stuff. But because of some of the stuff they went through and some of the accusations that have been aimed towards Bill, and even with some of the stuff that he hasn't admitted to all of it by any means, but some of it he has, in terms of just some of his poor choices with putting himself in compromising situations and stuff. Walt ended up writing this article, and it's fabulous. And I tell you what hit me first, Jody, whenever I read the article was, and I actually pulled this book out the other day just to remind myself of this. When I was 25 years old, so this would have been around 95, a book came out called Finishing Strong by Steve Farrar. And in this book, Steve Farrar tells this story of John that he heard John Bassanio tell. Now, John Bassanio was the pastor at First Baptist Church of Houston, and he passed away just this year. In August, he passed away. But he told the story and about his father-in-law telling him a story. So are you still tracking with me? It's a couple layers here to this thing. So Steve Farrar is telling the story Steve Bassanio told that he really got from his father-in-law. And his father-in-law basically pulled him aside at one point, and he told him to be careful in ministry, because it had been his experience over the years that only 1 in 10 that enter ministry stay strong and to the very end and last to the very end. And John had a really hard time believing his father-in-law about that. His father-in-law was Dr. Paul Beck, by the way. And he said that he left that meeting, that John Bassanio left that meeting, and he wrote down a whole bunch of names in his Bible. He wrote down 24 names of people, of his peers that were also in ministry. And then what was crazy was later on in life, John Bassanio looked back on that list at the age of 53. And he said that from time to time, and I'm reading this quote here, from time to time as the years have gone by, I've had to turn back to that page in my Bible and cross out a name. He said, I wrote down those names 24. He said, I wrote down those 24 names when I was just 20 years of age. 33 years later, there are only 3 names remaining of the original 24. And dude, I read that story whenever I was 25 years old. And now I'm 48. And Jody, I know you, like I mean, you've got people over the years that you've known that have fallen due to moral failure or whatever,
Sure.
And I've got that as well. And I've got just even recently stories that are coming out. And so when I read all that and heard all that, man, I was like, Walt, he's incredible. Walt Mueller, he's been doing this for a long time. And you're going to hear a whole lot about him in the podcast. But I was like, I'm just going to reach out. He's got his own podcast that's amazing. It also, people started listening to that. I go, stop listening to ours because it was amazing. But I just decided to reach out to him because I'd met him on one thing, and he said yes, and I was very excited about that. And then, Jody, let's be honest. Halfway through the podcast, you and I are texting each other while he's talking and going, "This is unbelievable."
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, folks, if you're listening, here's what I would ask you, because I know that it's a long one. And I know often if you're like me, you have to stop and listen. Around every corner, there's a new nugget of wisdom coming out of this podcast from Walt Mueller. And folks, I'm telling you, this is one that you need to dig in and listen. We all need to hear this one. And because youth minister for the longer haul, there's a whole lot of things that goes into that. From what we're talking about today, though, man, this is where it's at. Like, this is huge, super important, worth taking the time, digging into. Fellas, if you're listening, maybe even getting your wife to listen to and saying, hey, baby, I need you to help me. Ladies, if you're listening, putting up safeguards as well. And especially, man, if you're in your 20s, folks, listening to some of the wisdom of a guy who's in his 60s, just talking about some of the safeguards that need to be there. So super huge, super important. I'm really pumped about it.
Yeah, and I'll say this: like, I mean, we've had a ton of episodes with a ton of on a ton of topics, and I think they're all important. That's why we do them each week. If we didn't feel like that, we wouldn't have them. But this is one of the few that, in and of itself, could literally save your ministry, and it's a make or break. It's a make or break. So, yeah, I hope you'll listen intently and a few times, even maybe this is one you just keep in your back pocket and you pull out occasionally and re-listen to, and so it's super good. Make sure you listen to the end also, because Walt offers up a pretty sweet little giveaway at the end, and so you'll hear details on that as we come to a close with the interview. So, you ready?
Ready? Let's do it.
Cool. All right, here we go. Here's today's interview with Walt Mueller.
And now we're pleased to bring you our feature presentation.
Well, we are super excited to have on today's podcast Walt Mueller, and talk about the longer haul in youth ministry. Walt has been doing this for a while. I'll let him share that little story. Walt, welcome to the show, man. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, and thank you so much for reminding me how old I am.
Yeah, that's what we're here for. But to be fair, we're old too. So
Yeah, it's like, oh, I just had this conversation. I turned 62 last month. I don't feel it. In my brain, I still feel 24, 25. My wife would say I'm much more immature than that, but it just happens. It's like you blink and boom, you're there. It's the weirdest thing.
yeah, that's kind of wild. As a matter of fact, I heard this morning that Rick Springfield turned 69 today.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that's a name that I thought would never come up in my ears again. I was hoping.
Yeah. But I thought that was hilarious because like he was such a big deal in the 80s when I was a kid.
How old did he turn, did you say?
He turned 69 today.
Yeah.
69.
Yeah, I hope he changed.
Jesse's Girl.
Yeah.
If you're listening and you've not heard that song, you young whippersnappers, give that one a listen. It's a good one. So, Walt, thanks. Let's tell everybody who you are, man. So you've been doing this a little while for sure, and
yeah,
and honestly, and this isn't an age joke, but even whenever I was in my 20s, I was using your resources when I first started out as a youth pastor with my parents, in my youth group, and you've continued to do that. So could you give us a little background there? Let everybody kind of know where you're coming from, because you live and breathe youth ministry.
Yeah, you want to hear the story of how I got to do what I do?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
So I'll make it quick, but I came out of college in 1978 knowing I wanted to work with teenagers in some way, shape, or form. And my design for my life, my plan for my life was to go to work at a boys' home, like a Christian boys' home, and work with teenage boys who were delinquents or troubled. That was not my story, but that was where I really felt God was calling me. And then, just the way God reroutes us. Probably a month before I graduated, I was in the midst of interviews and with boys' homes, and I was being pushed by a guy who discipled me in college to join a campus ministry organization out of Pittsburgh called the Coalition for Christian Outreach, and just to get him off my back. He was really bugging me about this to the point where it was very annoying. I said, all right, I'll do an interview. I figured if I did the interview with this organization, I could then walk away from it and say, there, are you satisfied? Now I'm going to go work at a boys' home. And again, long story short, I took a job with him working in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania, on the campus of a University of Pittsburgh branch campus. I worked out of a local church there and worked halftime with halftime, by the way, was 40 hours in each job, 80 hours total. So halftime with the youth group there at the church and the other half up on campus. And that led to a call to do youth ministry. The other wonderful thing that came out of that was I met my wife, who was from Johnstown. And then I felt like, okay, God's calling me to youth ministry for life. So I was doing that. And the way I got into doing what I'm doing now, this again was not my plan. It was not my aspiration. I never would have imagined doing what I'm doing now with the Center for Parent Youth Understanding. But in the mid 80s, we were working very hard at this church outside of Philadelphia to minister to parents. And we wanted them to see us as their allies, as they fulfilled their responsibility as the primary nurturers, spiritual nurturers of their children and teens. And so we were fostering this relationship, which I think was a good relationship. It was a healthy relationship. And as a result of that, a group of parents came to me, mid to late 80s, and said, "Hey, we've got a problem." And I thought, oh boy, what did I do now? Because whenever parents come to you and you're in youth ministry and they say they have a problem,
that's not a good situation.
No,
typically.
it's like, what did I do now? And they said, well, it's not you this time. It's us. We're really out of touch with our kids. They're growing up in a world that's markedly different from our own. MTV was a big deal back then, and there were no smartphones or anything. And if kids wanted to engage with pop culture, that's where they went. And they knew their kids were watching this, engaging with it, listening to a lot of music, and this youth culture was really developing. They said, can you help us understand our kids? We know, they didn't say it in these terms, but they said, hey, we know we're called to be cross-cultural missionaries. We don't get the culture. Can you help us understand it? And I was deeply intimidated by this because I loved being with their kids. They scared me in some ways. And I said, well, why are you asking me? And they said, well, you spend time with them. You seem to know their world. You're closer in age to them than we are. This was a long time ago. And, just help us understand. So I started to teach them on a weekly basis for about an hour a week on Sunday mornings over the course of 3 months. I talk about one aspect of youth culture, and I was amazed not only at their hunger, but how much this helped them. They were now able to connect with their kids and have meaningful discussions about things like peer pressure, substance abuse, music and media, depression and suicide, developmental factors, all these different things. And I thought, man, the Lord is really doing something pretty amazing through this. It's not me. It's just giving this information. Well, was a little concerned that the kids were going to bail on me because, I was pulling back the curtain on their world to their parents. How dare you? We thought you were.
Oh, yeah. Giving away the
secrets. They appreciated it because they were now having these significant conversations with their parents that they desired, that they were made for, that they needed. And all that to say, God did something through that, not just in them, but in me. And I started to sense, much to my dismay, this call to leave local church youth ministry and do this full time. And I fought against it because I had raised my hand, youth ministry for the long haul in the local church. And my wife, who, if you know her, she's just a perfect wife for me. She calls me out on anything I need to be called out on. She's direct. She's to the point. She basically said, look, you've been toying with this thought that maybe God's calling you to help parents and help youth workers understand youth culture, doing that full time. You got to decide, are you doing it or not? And she said, I think the Lord's calling you to this. And so I said, all right. And I went through a long process of, evaluation, of which I won't go into here, but it became abundantly clear that this is what I needed to do. So it really was, it was actually 29 years ago last month that we held a formation meeting for a board, governed nonprofit to study youth culture that has become the Center for Parent Youth Understanding, which is what I've been doing. Now we're going into our 30th year. And so that's the quick story. It may not have sounded so quick, but that's the quick story on how we got to where we're at now. And so for the last almost 30 years now, we've been working to keep our finger on the pulse of youth culture, because we know that anybody who's concerned about kids and wants to minister to kids, who wants to point them to the truths of the gospel and see them follow Christ, we need to see ourselves as cross-cultural missionaries, whether that's parents, youth pastors, educators, counselors. And so we're trying as hard as we can to keep our finger on the pulse of the youth culture. It's become a lot more difficult because youth culture is much more pervasive and widespread. But we're working to do that. That's what CPYU is all about. Those who may not be familiar with us can check us out at cpyu.org and see what that is. So we're trying to, help people bring the unchanging light of God's word to bear on a rapidly changing world, and that's really what we do.
Yeah, well, that is really great stuff there, because and that's what I've been using over the years, and you've been a great resource to youth pastors for a long time now. And at the end, we'll circle back here in a few minutes, Walt, towards the end, and give you an opportunity really for our listeners to say, hey, here are some things that you are currently offering that you can help youth pastors with. So Walt, I appreciate you coming on, especially because of the topic we're about to cover. And it's not necessarily a fun one today. It's not like we're like, woohoo, let's talk about how to do great games in youth ministry. It's kind of the opposite of that. You recently wrote an article on your blog there on cpyu.org called Willow Creek Be Soberly Minded, and it was really tied to everything that Willow Creek has been going through and what Bill Hybels has gone through really in the last 6 months to a year. And the article served as a great reminder for me personally. And I just decided, I said, hey, Jody, how about if we see if Walt will come on? And so I just reached out to you with the hopes that maybe you could come on and address some of this stuff, because my guess is that, like Jody and I, you've over the years seen way too many friends, and heard way too many stories of even acquaintances, possibly of youth pastors or ministry leaders that have fallen into some type of sin that has disqualified them. And so I think it's worth for our listeners just to do a little checkup today and kind of go, hey, well, if you want to do ministry for the long haul, this is one area that we really need to make sure that we have in check. So when you wrote that article, where did that come? What did that come out of, Walt, for you? Like, what really stirred you enough to kind of say, I need to put some pen to paper here?
Yeah. And I've written on these things and talked about these things before. And like you said, there's really a couple of things at work. I mean, look, the thing at Willow Creek is high profile, and that's not what I'm picking on. And I'm not picking on that. I sparked some thoughts because, I have, as you've said, had way too many friends in my 40 years now doing youth ministry full time. I've had way too many friends, way too many people that are acquaintances, and way too many stories that I read about. I just saw two this morning online, when I was checking the news about youth pastors who were at various spots in sexual assault cases, inappropriate interactions with students in their ministry. These were criminal cases now, and I was reading about this, and Google News, this popped up, I guess because of some of my interests in youth ministry. And every time I see these things, the older I get, the less I take a posture of, shame on you. How could you do that? What were you thinking? Boy, I'm glad that this kind of thing's never crossed my mind, or I would never do this, or this would never happen to me. My posture is shifted over the years from that to one that's much more realistic, I think, as I have become more and more in touch with my own sin and brokenness, my own depravity, where I'm saying, there but for the grace of God go I. So at one level, there's a real concern that I have for myself, like learn, the sobering warning, as I said in the title, the sobering reminder that this is who we are as human beings. And if this can happen to this guy or that woman over there, it certainly can happen to me, because they're broken human beings like I am as well. So there's a concern about myself. There's a concern about how I conduct myself in ministry, to not get tripped up, as we're warned by Peter, be sober-minded, because, your inner enemy, the devil, prowls around like a lion just ready to pounce. That that is a frightening image to me. And it's not one that I should take lightly or that I should breeze over as I'm reading the scriptures. So there's that, but there's also just the general health of the body of Christ. And, there's a cultural thing as well. Like, why so many people getting wrapped up in this? So, like I'm in Pennsylvania, and I'm sure there's not a person listening who hasn't heard what's come out of Pennsylvania in the last couple of weeks regarding the grand jury report that's come out as a result of some work from our state attorney general here regarding the Catholic Church and the systemic abuse and the pedophilia and things that have been going on, here in Pennsylvania. So, again, I'm not Roman Catholic, but I can't sit back and go, oh, those doggone Catholics, look at them. No, this is a human issue, and this is a brokenness issue. So this is where it came from for me. And the reason I'm stating this with such length is that everybody who's listening has to realize, don't wag a disapproving finger or nod your head in disapproval. This is you. This is me. And because of our shared humanity and our brokenness, and I would go a step further and say, to you guys, just because of who we are and what we do in youth in ministry, we're really targeted. If you talk about the enemy,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
the enemy doesn't want to take out those that are on the enemy's side. The enemy wants to take out those who are working aggressively to take out the enemy.
Yeah, 100%. Literally, one of the first things my pastor here, where I'm serving here at Johnson Ferry, after he hired me, one of the first things he said in his office was that very warning.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, Chris, my experience is that you're going to have a target, on your back, and you're going to have to be careful,
Yeah.
which is overwhelming. And I tell you what rings true with all of this, and I agree with you, Walt, especially agree with you that we have to be careful. It's not about pointing to Willow Creek or any other story that we've heard or any other pastor. It's about saying, man, if that could happen to them, that could happen to me. And what terrifies me about that, here and Jody, our heart, obviously, we call this thing the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast. We want to be in it for the long haul. And part of what scares me to death is I love what I do. And not only do I love what I do as far as working for the church, my family loves the fact that we're in youth ministry and that we're serving at a church. And the idea that I could get caught up, it's terrifying to think that somehow, because it wouldn't just be me that would be affected. It would be literally my wife, my 18-year-old son, my soon to be 15-year-old daughter. Just it's terrifying.
Yeah. And, look, I study culture, and people would say, well, what does this have to do with culture? Well, it's everything to do with culture and the people who study culture and ministry, because there is I believe there's a culture in ministry in general and a culture in youth ministry that really lends itself to this. So, for example, in the world of youth ministry, think about what's happening in our culture related to family. You've got more and more kids you're ministering to who are not having their needs for relationship and love and guidance and direction met by mom and or dad, but they still have those needs. And here you are, a person who has entered into their lives, who has a relationship with them, and who maybe is providing some of those things that are missing in the home. And I'm just citing like one specific example here for your kids who are struggling in the home. And it is very easy, like in counseling, they talk about transference, where, a client will enter into somehow, some way, and in their mind, an inappropriate attraction to or relationship to the counselor. Look, we got to be honest. These are vulnerable kids, and it is very easy for them to look at us and, and especially a lot for younger guys and gals in youth ministry. I think this happens. The older we get, I think it's still there, but they're attracted to us. And let's be honest, we've always desire as human beings attention. We desire, to get the pat on the back. And when somebody pays attention to us, maybe even if things aren't going well in our other relationships where they should be going well, first and foremost, our marriage, it's easy for us to fall into this as well. And these things can if we're not aware of this and our guard is down, the dart or the arrow can be out of the bow and into our chest before we know it. And what we have to do is get to the point where we see the arrow in the bow being lifted up, and we're going to stop it right there, because we don't want to have to notice this after we're in trouble. Say, oh my goodness, how did I get to this point? And this is where I think just being watchful is so important. So there's that. And I'm going to say this for older guys in youth ministry, this just doesn't go with kids. This goes with the parents of the kids that we're working with, because I've heard those stories as well. And all you have to do is, look, if we are honest with ourselves and with each other, just at a level of sexuality, God's made us to be sexual beings. God's made us to have sexual desires. God's made us to things to be attractive to us. And we've got to manage this. And we're all tempted, but it's very easy to jump over that fine line of temptation. We need to know what the warning signs are and just not let that happen. And I like what you said there, Chris, about the fallout, because this isn't just something, that's going to affect me. We can get that thought in our minds, but it's everyone and everything around us, not just now, but in our past ministries and in our future ministries, that all these things are going to tank. And I can share this. My good friend Marv Penner, you probably know in our world of youth ministry. Marv's been around a little bit longer than I have doing youth ministry. He, like me, is on the road a lot, and that adds an extra level of care and concern. So there's a lot of borders and boundaries we have that we hold to, that some people think, well, that's pretty legalistic. No, it's not about you. It's about me and keeping protection. But Marv, years ago, and he went public with this a few years ago. That's why I can share it. I knew about this for a while, but Marv had actually written a letter to himself, and it said, "Dear Marv, you're on the road. If you compromise your vow to your wife, here's what's going to happen." And that letter is just this lengthy list of thing after thing after thing after thing that will fall apart in his life, that will come undone. The things that he and his faithfulness to the Lord has worked so hard to build in ministry through obedience. And he packs that letter every time he goes on the road, it's the last thing he puts on top of his clothes before he shuts his suitcase. And it's the first thing he sees when he gets to a hotel and opens it.
Wow.
And so that, that's the kind of, and people are going, well, aren't you over it? No, I'm not. Look, if you know your brokenness, why did Jesus have to come? Because we're messed up. And if we think more highly of ourselves than we ought, we're not only allowing ourselves to be open to those temptations, those attacks, those arrows, but we're short selling what it was that Christ came for when he came to redeem us from our sin, because we can't do that ourselves. Why do we need Jesus if we're not so horribly broken? So, these are the kinds of things that I think about a lot. I'm going to say this, I have been blessed. I mentioned this before, but I've been blessed with a wife who's no nonsense. And, a few years ago, some of us who have been in youth ministry for a long time, we talked about this. A bunch of guys, we were talking about this and said that, one of the best gifts we've been given is a wife who isn't impressed by us. She, all of us would say this about our wives. They love us, but they're not impressed by us, because when we become impressed, if you read the dynamics of the Willow Creek story, people gave in to things that they shouldn't have given into, or advances they shouldn't have, allegedly, advances that they shouldn't have responded to, because they were enamored. And this is where, we can't be impressed by us. We can't even be impressed by ourselves, and that's what a good wife will help us with. So
hey, let's dig in there for a second with that wife thing. Walt, when you say that your wife helps you with that, are you able to unpack that a little more? And what can our what say you're 27 years old listening right now, and we know that we've got a lot of younger guys starting out. What should we be asking our wives to do for us with that? And obviously we have to be accountable to our own sin and our own struggles. But that said, like what could we get them to do? Or maybe it's even reverse for our ladies that are in youth ministry. Should their husbands be helping out, with that?
I think part of it is that our tendency in ministry as we move along, and maybe God blesses us with what people would call success, and then we start. And I wrote this in this piece I wrote on the blog. Don't believe your own press. It really doesn't matter what others say about you. The flattery of others, I wrote, gets you nowhere good. Listen to the one who knows, loves, leads, and redeems you. And what I hear there is you're horribly broken, and yet you're horribly loved by me. And once we are redeemed, we're still broken, and we still battle the sin nature. And we can't be led to believe that ends. And this is where I would say to the younger guys and gals in youth ministry, ask your spouse to be painfully honest with you and to not hold you up and see you as something that you're not. But yeah, it's like in our family, we just say we're a bunch of broken people living with a bunch of broken people. And I don't need, my wife affirms me and she supports me. I've known that for the 36 years we've been married. I mean, she is the one who said, look, stop fighting God on this call 30 years ago, this, and she's always been there to stand by me. But part of her standing by me and loving me is loving me enough to tell me the truth. And many times that's the truth about myself. And sometimes it's just a pain in the neck to hear it. It's like, it's hard, it's difficult. But I would say that has been one of the tools God's used to keep me grounded. In many of these situations where guys are getting in trouble, that hasn't been present. And so, she's not chipping away at me. She's just telling me the truth about myself. And she doesn't, I don't sit here and I'm not impressed by myself. And I'm not sure if that makes sense or not, but
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. My calling is just keep doing what God's called you to do and do it the best you can, and realize you're not doing it anywhere near the level that God has called you to do it. So just keep striving to do it well, but realize your brokenness in the midst of this, and do not get full of yourself. And I think that's a prayer we need to pray. God, surround me with people, whether it be in my family, with my spouse, with my children, in my church. Surround me with people who see me as I am and do not think too highly of me and who keep me grounded.
Jody, I just want to go on record and say I'm not impressed with you.
Thanks.
I hardly know either. I'm just getting to know you two guys, and I got to be honest, I'm not impressed with either of you.
Yeah. Well, but you're Walt Mueller. We're like Christopher and Jody Livingston, and nobody even knows who we are. So,
well, I think too, one of the reasons why we were talking about so important to tackle this is I think even beyond kind of the fallout that even Chris is talking about, or we're talking about where it's like personal fallout, family fallout, obviously there are repercussions that ripple through the student ministry afterwards, the church afterwards. And one of the things that I think we're seeing and hearing, that I'm seeing and hearing so often now, is almost any time a student pastor is leaving a position to go someplace else, it seems almost that many times the assumption is something happened. Or when a church is looking for a student pastor, they're looking for a student pastor because the previous student pastor or pastor left under some suspicious circumstances, or something happened, or were asked to leave. And so what scares me, and my heart just breaks and grieves, is the posture almost now has become one that is so much slower. Even, in the past, I think maybe there was a slowness to trust because no one stayed put. And that's kind of why we are doing what we're doing. We're trying to encourage youth pastors to stay put. And so you had this revolving door, so no one wanted to trust you because they didn't think you were going to stick around. Now there's still that present, but you add to that now this whole thing of distrust from the sense of integrity, moral bounds, and I think it's just paralyzing to student ministry.
Yeah.
And just it just breaks my heart.
Well, I do think, and this is a cultural reality, that we're living in a day and age right now where you say certain terms to certain groups of people, and immediately, an image comes to mind. So, let's be honest. Right now, if you talk about the Roman Catholic Church, many people, the first thing they're going to think about is it's not going to be anything good that's come out of the church or anything positive that's being done by the church. It's what we read in the news. And it's the same thing when you talk about evangelical Christians. It's tragic that the word evangelical has lost its meaning. People now think politics, they think hypocrisy, they think about these big scandals. 30 some years ago when I was in seminary, I was working on the North Shore of Boston in a hotel. I was the only Christian employee that I was aware of out of about 135 people in this old historic hotel. And people, my coworkers would find out that I was a seminary student in an evangelical Protestant seminary, and they were very gracious to me. We had wonderful conversations. Nobody ostracized me, but this is back in the 1980s. And I'm going to tell you that when they found out, 9 times out of 10, the first question they would ask after finding out and then kind of pausing in disbelief, and discomfort would be, they would say something like, what do you think about Jerry Falwell and Jim Baker and Pat Robertson and Jimmy Swaggart? Because that's their connect, right? And
Right.
it's always the stories, that get the most press, which are typically negative stories, that shape people's opinions. And I'm afraid you're right that our youth ministry world is getting like this. And this is why I did a seminar. Tick Long asked me to do it probably 4 or 5 years ago at the National Youth Workers Convention, called Wisdom for a Young Youth Worker. And one of the things I said to the young youth workers was, never ever forget that you are just one bad decision away from being a headline. And when I said it, I thought that's just so negative and so raw. And, ultimately our good behavior should be motivated by a great desire to thank God for his grace in our lives and bring glory to God. But the bottom line is, at this point, we got to realize that we're sinful human beings, as I've said already. And I'll tell you what prompted that. When I put that seminar together, one of the last things I did, and you guys have done this, when you teach, the last thing you do is you get your visuals, your graphics, you put your PowerPoint together.
Oh, yeah.
And I Google image searched youth pastor, or I can't remember if it was youth pastor or youth worker. And I'm not kidding you, about a third to a half of the pictures that popped up were mugshots of youth workers who had gotten in trouble. And I just sat there and I stared at the screen and I thought, oh my goodness. So it's no wonder, as you say that, people are thinking this. And again, that may be unfair because, it's a smaller percentage of a large group that's marking us all and shaping these impressions. But I want to let those impressions shape me, because that can raise my antenna to the kinds of things I need to watch out for in my own life. I mean, yeah, it's like running down, if you're jogging down a path in the dark, you want to know where the potholes are, where the sticks are, where the fallen branches and trees are, where the turns are. And this helps us know what's ahead, just because we share that human nature. I hope that makes sense. But
No, I think so. And I would say too, like even beyond, I always tell young youth pastors this as well. It's, I mean, a bad decision can ruin everything, but even an accusation,
oh yeah,
will decimate you. So it doesn't even necessarily be that it doesn't necessarily have to mean that you actually do something. You could just put yourself in a really bad spot and be accused of something, and you're done for. And so I think you just have to guard yourself.
Yeah.
And
it's the guarding part that seems to me to be such a challenge right now.
Yeah.
Well,
Because
yeah.
I feel like here's a weird illustration to think about it, but this is what's been bouncing around. I don't know who decided that painters that paint houses and stuff, I don't know who made the decision for them to wear white all the time. Because to me, that makes no sense, because don't they know that they're painting and that they're likely to get paint all over them as a result of that? Like, what the heck, who made it? There's probably some good reason why painters wear white. I probably need to Google that. But that said, I feel like as a youth pastor that I'm wallowing around at times in yucky culture stuff. And it's hard not to get caught up in that stuff. The things we know our kids. In order to be attentive to what they're going through, we have to be aware of this stuff. And so we're exposed. Potential moments of failure exist in all of that. And I feel like we're just more in the middle of all of it at times. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I want to go back to not just that, but what was said before, because we were starting to talk there about borders and boundaries.
Well, this won't be the first time that a interview person has got me back on track. So yeah. This happens all the time. So the listeners are used to this.
Keep going on what you said there and spring off of that, because there is absolutely something to that, because you start to see in the middle, you've got to sort through the muck and say, what is this? And what in this can be, am I engaging with this in the right way? So, for example, like with culture, youth workers will say to me, so you want me to go, read what they read, watch what they watch, and listen to what they listen to? And I say, yes, as long as you're able to do that. And everybody has a different line. But there's a huge, they'll ask, well, isn't that compromise? No, because there's a huge difference between engaging with something to understand what the narrative is that it's teaching kids, or engaging with it to hear the narrative and believe the narrative and incorporate the narrative, allow the narrative to dictate how you live in your own life. There's a big difference between those two options. And, it's like physicians, you don't have to have cancer to operate on cancer, but you better have studied cancer. But at the same time, you don't want to study cancer and try to grab cancer and stick it in your own body in foolish ways and say, man, I hope this thing will take over me. I don't know if that metaphor or that analogy works, that illustration. But all I'm saying there is, like, when you engage with it, you want to reach kids who are buying into that narrative. You want to understand the narrative so you can undo the narrative, so you can argue kids out of the narrative, but bring the light of the biblical narrative to bear on and correct where the cultural narrative needs to be corrected. So there is that kind of muddling around, if that makes sense, Chris. Yeah,
it does. Well, a recent example of that for me personally, Walt, was 13 Reasons.
Yeah.
That was a great, for me personally. I'm not saying you should or shouldn't watch all of it every minute or not. I'm not really making a judgment on anybody that has or hasn't. But for me personally, that was an example for me where, like, I felt like I needed to be exposed to that. I needed to understand what was being said in the culture related to that, because there's no question that our teenagers was watching it. But as I jumped into it personally, I decided, you know what? I don't have to watch every episode in this season to get the overall grasp of this thing. Mm-hmm. And so I was able to watch, like, my wife and I watched like the first maybe one or two episodes on the front end, and then we watched the back end, and kind of, and I felt like, that's enough. That's enough. For me personally, I was like, that's enough. Because I felt like I was wallowing around in the muck, with that thing. And, but man, what a big impact. But that to me is a personal example of kind of where I personally struggle and try to find balance.
Yeah. But here's another thing that can come out of that. Depictions of human nature and the brokenness of human nature, even when not done from a Christian perspective, can inform us of our own brokenness and warn us about the consequences of our own brokenness if we decide to embrace and indulge that brokenness. And and this is where I think it's important to listen to some of these stories. I think Jody said before about borders and boundaries, putting ourselves in bad situations, and there's some very practical lessons that we need to learn there as well. So, for example, and I don't want to harp on the Willow Creek story. Much of what left me scratching my head about that was, why, if these accounts are true, why in the first place was he having, someone, why was he and his wife having someone live in their home allegedly? And then the wife and the kids go away and the two of them are left there alone. Or why would he invite them up to a hotel room? Or why this or why that? Don't get yourself in situations that are going to be difficult to run from. Don't even set up situations that indulge your brokenness, where you think, oh, I can do this, but not go this far, but not go this far, if that all makes sense. And I don't know what was going through his mind, but this is where we have to hold each other accountable. So, for example, a simple thing for me when I travel is I just say, hey, if it's a female youth worker and she says, hey, I'm going to pick you up at the airport, when your flight gets in at 11:30, you know what? Bring someone else along if you would. And this is not a criticism of you. It is basically, this is not about you. This is about me. And I know that when you say it's about me, it sounds so selfish, but I want to have those safeguards there because A, there's the appearance, and B, there's a possibility that things could go way haywire. C, there's a possibility that, someone could make up a story that's not even true. There's all kinds of scenarios that could work themselves out. And
and there's another part of that too, Walt. The D would be, if I could add a D to your list, It would be that if there ever was somebody that said something, made an accusation, isn't it going to be a beautiful moment for you to be able to say, that's impossible because I never ride alone with another woman in the car other than my wife.
Yeah.
And that to me as a youth pastor, I think if you're listening, that's a real practical hands-on kind of moment for you to be listening to. If there's not been somebody older than you speak into your life and say, you should never ride in the opposite, ride alone in the car with opposite, that's something you really probably ought to consider adding to your list there. And it's not because of them, it's because of you, and just, safeguarding yourself. And because if ever there was an accusation, to be able to say, you can't find another, I don't do that. That's a real win.
It's interesting to have this conversation because this is how much the culture's changed. I think back to when I was doing youth ministry in 1978, starting in high school, middle school ministry. And I have a lot of friends who I'm still in touch with who were doing youth ministry then. And some of the names we know in the youth ministry world, friends that we all have, they were doing it back then. And we have these conversations and I'm thinking, what foolishness we were involved in. At one level, just some of the dangerous activities we involved kids in. So I remember, it'd be a snowy day in Western Pennsylvania and the kids would have off from school and they'd say, hey, meet me down at so-and-so's house. And I'd tie a rope on the back of my car and attach, big inner tubes to it and be pulling these kids down the road and plowing them into snowbanks and making them fly all over them. So I'm thinking now,
so that's what y'all do in snow. We're from the South, Walt. We have no idea what you're talking about.
What in the world was I, and nobody questioned that. Parents take my kid, have some fun. Nobody ever said you're being foolish. Not only in today's world are you being foolish, you're a lawsuit waiting to happen. And so you got to think about that. But then, the other thing was, it was not unusual for us in youth ministry back then. I remember sitting outside of the church late one night after youth group with one of the girls from the youth group who was having guy problems. And she was lamenting, I'll never get married. I'll never this, and trying to affirm her that she was made in the image of God and, going through all the, just trying to encourage her. And then, letting her, she called her parents and said, I'm going to be home late. Walt will bring me home. And we never thought twice about that. And as I think back, there was never anything duplicitous on my part that was going through my head. But man, in today's world, you can't do that. Look,
things have changed, no doubt.
Look, I'm going to tell you, last week, Um, we all here at CPYU, we all had to get fingerprinted. And then we all have to go through a 3-hour online course we have to pass on, child abuse prevention and that sort of thing. I haven't taken it yet. It's got to be done by the end of next week, and I'm going to do this, but everyone else has gone through it. And this was required by our insurance company for in order for us to carry liability insurance. And I'm not working face to face with the same group of kids. I'm never alone with kids anymore. I'll go speak to kids, but it's always in a large group setting. But this is just what's happened in our culture and the kinds of precautions that insurance companies are taking, because this is the ministry setting that we work in. And so, again, it's not just to ensure that you're not going to get sued. This is all to ensure that you're going to glorify God through your behavior. You're going to make good, godly decisions. This isn't the way you conduct yourself with your students, with their parents, with other people. This is an act of worship. And, just so we got to learn from it.
Well, what would you go ahead, Jody? Go ahead.
I was going to say, so let's say someone's listening. Maybe they've not really considered this, or they're seeing all this happen, but they're not sure, what to do. I mean, obviously you wrote about this some in the post we've already mentioned, but like, what are some practical steps or some advice that you would give them? Because I think, especially, I know for me, like even like you're saying, man, when I first started in youth ministry, I didn't know any better. You didn't think about it really. It's not until you get a little older, and especially further down the road, like now, I think at a certain point you realize longevity is more than just not quitting, right? I mean, longevity is, it's this kind of stuff as well. These things can absolutely derail not just longevity in a church, but your ministry altogether. And so for listeners who maybe are just starting to wrestle with this or haven't thought about it in a while, what would you say?
That's a great question. One of the first things I would say is if, you're listening to this and you're still tuned in and you're going, man, these guys, I can't, this is so foreign to me. This would never happen to me, or this is not me. That's the first indicator that you've got an issue. So in other words, if you don't think this is an issue for you, wake up, it is. And, that's kind of the first sign of the possibility of downfall, is that you don't realize how broken you are and that you do have to have your guard up. So one of the things I said in that blog is what I say to youth workers all the time, and that is, remember how messed up you really are. It's your own brokenness that's going to be the problem. And I wrote this, I said, if you think you're inherently good, you're setting yourself up to allow your inherent badness to ruin you. And, again, you're just one bad decision away from being a headline. So understand your brokenness and you just have to have that realization. I think too, what's most foundational and basic, and I wrote about this is, and I tell youth workers this, I tell kids this, I tell my own kids this all the time, fill your well with the Word of God. You need to be rooted deeply. You need to have much to draw from. And the reality is that with everything in life, including what we're talking about right now, our vision is horribly skewed unless we are viewing things through the corrective lens of God's Word, a biblical world and life view. And it is not until we immerse ourselves in God's Word and allow God's Spirit, to sanctify us and bring about change, that we're able to really discern good from evil, right from wrong. And so the more we immerse ourselves in God's Word, I think the greater the ability we have to see things clearly. And this is where, to young youth workers, I would say, really listen hard and well to the older youth workers in your life, because you're going to hear some seasoned wisdom that comes out of maybe some pretty bad decisions and realizations as a result of those decisions. Francis Bacon said, histories make men wise, histories make women wise. Well, personal histories from other people in the church and in our world of youth ministry will make us wise. So, learn from that as well. But and those people would always say, I need my well to be filled. I wasn't spending time in God's Word. I lost my sense of discernment. You ought to have accountability. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, and I know know of you well enough to know this, Walt. You're speaking more than just we're not just talking about preparing a Bible study every week.
Right.
Like we're talking about I'm preparing a Bible study every week to teach, but on top of that, I'm still walking with Jesus.
Yeah, there's
I'm
got to be that time.
spending time personally in the Word that's separate from I dug in to prepare a lesson.
Right. Well, you know what's sad, Chris, and this is a general statement, and I know it's not true for everybody, but I do think there's a growing number of youth workers who, they're caught up in the busyness of youth ministry, and so they're not tending to their own spiritual growth, life, and development, as you just said. But I'm seeing fewer and fewer spending time in preparing even their lessons.
Oh, yes.
Other people's preparation, and they're working from that. And so now you've got a double whammy. Because both those things should be shaping you. And now, if all you're doing is reading other people's scripts that they've written, there's numerous issues at the level of that. I'm going to say that, but you lose your passion, but your own spiritual growth and development is going to be stunted, as well.
Chris, I don't know if you know what Walt and I just became best friends.
Yeah, well, and if you're listening, just hit the 15-second back button 3 times right now or 4 times and listen to all that again. Dang. Yeah.
Well, and people would say, well, come on, we've been using curriculum for years. Yeah, we have. But don't, and we can learn from what others have done in the study of others. But I'm afraid that with technology today, we've gotten to the point where we just don't prepare. We don't prepare ourselves, and we don't prepare. And we just got done here today recording one of our Youth Culture Matters podcasts that'll be out next week with a group of youth workers who do incredible planning that comes out of their study. And I asked them, on this particular podcast, to all the youth workers who are listening as we begin the school year, the youth ministry year, what's gone into your planning? What's gone into your research? What's gone into your study? What do you have? What are you going to cover? And these folks are deep, and it grows out of their own involvement in God's word. So that's an important thing.
Good stuff.
Here's another warning, and I wrote about this, and that is that you've got to remind yourself that bigger is not better. Because we buy into this view of youth ministry success that it's like a business spreadsheet and the bottom line. And I love, Rich Van Pelt, who's a youth ministry icon and a good friend. A couple of years ago, he got at a National Youth Workers Convention a Lifetime Achievement Award, which Rich would tell you just felt so awkward for him to do that. And that's a sign of Rich's deep humility and his understanding of himself. But he served youth workers so well. And Mark Matlock, when he had him up on the stage, asked him, Rich, what's one good bit of advice that you can pass on to youth workers that someone once gave to you? And Rich, I think without hesitation, said something I've heard him say before, which is so brilliant. He said that one of his mentors early on in youth ministry said, you take care of the depth of your ministry and let God take care of the breadth. And I'm just going to tell you that with social media right now and all these great tools at our hands, people are jockeying for attention. They're jockeying for the audience. They're jockeying to be big. They're jockeying for the platform. They're jockeying to be well known. And please understand, that's not a good thing, because that will become primary. And what happens is you'll start to believe that you're really bigger and better than you really are. And when you start to do that, that's when you need to get yourself ready for a great fall. So, and when I say great fall, I don't mean a good September, October, November. I'm talking about a bad downfall. And, don't believe your own press. I mean, that's just the way it is. And, look, you guys with your podcasting, you're probably going to have, as your following grows, you're going to have youth workers who come up to you, Chris, Jody, how can I do what you do? And the motivation is not so much, I'm going to make a general statement. The motivation is not so much to serve Christ and the church, but the motivation for this question is really, how can I be bigger and better? How can I developing a following and an audience? And,
how can we get 10s and 20s of listeners as well? I'm just kidding. Sorry.
Hey, that's 10 times what most people have. So that's, that's 10 to 20 times. No, but yeah, and I know you're being humble there, but you know what I'm saying? And I have these conversations with my friends when we speak at the conventions. None of us get great joy out of that. I mean, that is hard work and a lot of preparation. It's difficult. It's tough. And, I'm thankful for the opportunity to teach, but I know I get the opportunity to teach because God's brought me to that point where maybe there are some things I've learned that are worth passing on to others. And so I'll a lot of times have, afterwards, and my buddies, the same thing. We lament this every single time we're at one of these things. We'll go to dinner and we'll talk about, I had 3 23-year-old guys and 4 25-year-old guys come up to me and go, how can I do what you do? And I'll say, what do you mean? How can I do what I do? Speak. And I mean, that's deeply troubling to me because it's, you want to have an audience, right? I mean, and nobody's really willing to admit that, but maybe they are now. I don't know. But, the thing that we always say is none of us aspired to this. It just happened. And, like Rich said, you take care of the depth of your ministry and let God take care of the breadth. And if that's 10, if that's 20, if you've got 200 kids, so be it. But don't buy into the thing that bigger is better, because then you'll start to believe your own press. You'll be pursuing all the wrong things. And I'm going to tell you, I think at some of these big churches where these downfalls happen, one of the things you hear is that people say, well, I wasn't really willing to challenge the system or speak up because he had such a great ministry, or it would ruin the church. No, what he was doing was ruining the church.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we can talk about that forever, but again, learn from it. I'm not pointing fingers. I'm saying this could be all of us, and in some ways, it is. Yeah.
Walt, we want to honor your time, and we've been going a good while now. So I was wondering if we could wrap up with two things. Number one, I want to end with giving you an opportunity to really help our listeners kind of know where they can find you. But before we do, and this is a little bit more of a challenging thought here, but if someone has listened, that's listening right now, has maybe taken a few steps down a road they know they shouldn't be on. Let's say somebody is listening and they've started flirting with compromising a little bit. Maybe that's through, a struggle with technology, pornography, or maybe that's through a relationship flirting, so whatever it might be. What would you say to that person? What direction would you point them in?
Yeah. And by the way, that is a great question, but it's a difficult one to answer because every situation is different. And with
everything, are unique. Yep.
But I can attempt to answer it. And that would be this, that, first thing is find some people who will hold you accountable. And I'm not talking about yes people. Those are not accountability people. Those are people who are complicit. If we are looking for people who will say what we want them to say, that's not good. I want people in my life who love me enough to tell me the truth. And sometimes that means going to someone who is really going to call you out and walk you down the difficult road. But I think confession and repentance are important. And the process of repentance is a long road. The process of restoration is a long road. So find somebody. That might have to be a counselor, or it might involve a counselor. So that's one step to go. But the other I would say is this, that if you're dabbling in things that are the kind of things we're reading about in the paper, or you're tempted towards that, or that's an issue for you, get out. And that sounds so harsh, but just run. Get out. Pull yourself out of ministry and get some help, because that's just tough stuff. And I know Marv's written about this. Mark Penner, Rich Van Pelt has written about this. And I appreciate the advice those guys give. They do a thing called Hope and Healing for Broken Kids for us. And some of the stuff related to this is that they, say, man, if you're finding your identity in kids and getting your jollies from being in relationships with kids, that's not where it's supposed to come from. And certainly you can cross some lines there. But if you're entering into some unethical things, get out, step back, and it may be costly. It will be costly, but I'm
Yeah.
not sure what to say
Man.
beyond that.
Well, Walt, thank you so much. I mean, I think we could talk forever. We really appreciate you giving your time to come on today. And man, I know it's going to be helpful for the listeners and challenging to them. If folks wanted to catch up with
Sure.
you beyond this, where's the easiest place,
Well,
the easiest way for them to
yeah. The
find you?
simplest thing is just go to our website. That's the gateway into everything that we do, and you can find it at cpyu.org, cpyu.org. And spend 5 or 10 minutes just tooling around there. There's a lot on there, a lot more than I'm even aware is there. And there's a lot of audio resources, podcasts. We do a daily 1-minute radio spot. You can listen to that there. The blogs on there, and then we have a couple of little sites we've birthed that deal with issues of one on sexual integrity, a sexual integrity initiative, a digital kids initiative on all things technology, college transition initiative on the movement from high school to college. We're all concerned about that. So, spend a little time there to see what's there. And I will say that everything on there, for the most part, is absolutely free. And it's there for youth workers, thanks to our donors. It's there for youth workers to pass on to parents. You don't have to ask for permission, print it out, email digital copies, whatever, but make use of it. It's there for you.
Super. Awesome.
You do have some stuff that is also super helpful. I'm looking at one of these right now. I'm going to put you on the spot here, Walt. We love doing giveaways, man. You
Yeah.
willing to give something away to our listeners? Like, I don't know, maybe like $1 million or something like that?
Yeah, I got a box of paper clips here I'm not using. That clear my desk up. No, here's what we're going to do. We're gonna give away a copy. We have a new series of parent meetings. There's one that's in the bag. 2 are in production, post production right now, being edited and such. It's a series called Just Add Parents, and it's parent meetings. This is what got me into what I'm doing, informing parents and equipping parents. And so we'll make available the first one, which is on kids and technology. I think it's called Raising Tech-Wise Kids. I don't have it in front of me right now.
Tech-sensible parenting.
Tech-sensible parenting, that's it. So we're going to make that available, and it's a simple way for youth workers to bring parents together for anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half to 2 to 3 hours over the course of 3 weeks. And we give you all the content, all the video content, all the discussion questions. All you do is add parents and then hit play and facilitate discussion. And it's a great way for you to equip and educate parents to do their job better. So we'll make that available.
That's great. So, hey, folks, if you're listening, go on to the Super Secret Podcast group on Facebook, and we'll have a post on there where you can make a comment and enter, and then we will do a drawing, a couple weeks after this comes out, and they'll send that to you. We'll make Walt and those guys available or aware of that, and they'll send it to you. So it's great, man. It's something like that is super helpful to you. We've talked in a recent podcast, man. If you're 27-year-old, if you're 27 years old and you're trying to teach parents and you don't have kids of your own and you're barely married or not married, and something like this really adds validity. It helps bring you along in a way where it looks like you've really prepared well, and that's a win. So I love this concept and this particular resource. It's really good.
Cool. Well, Walt, thanks again for coming on and giving your time, man. I cannot tell you how much we appreciate it, and keep doing what you're doing. I know Chris and I both benefited.
What you guys are doing, you're helping old guys like me. So thanks for doing that.
All right. Well, Walt, we'll catch you later then.
Thank you.
Well, there you have it. I mean, seriously, an episode that is a make or break, and so I hope you'll take all that you hear there into. I mean, take it that seriously. It's something that is so easy to not, and I think we're seeing the ramifications of that throughout. And we genuinely want to see you do this for a very, very long time. And so, man, go back and listen again and again and again and again. So good, so good. I mean,
yeah, it was good. And let's just say this as well, Jody, because I think I can speak for you on this, man. Folks, if you're listening and you need to reach out to someone confidentially and talk through a couple things, and you don't have anybody to do that with, reach out to me or Jody.
Yeah, sure.
We can't solve all your problems, necessarily. I mean, we're not like some kind of awesome gurus that just know everything or anything. But if you find yourself in a predicament and you just need to have a confidential, Now, obviously, if you call us, I mean, just full disclosure here, if you called us and you were just doing something illegal or crazy, we would be, I mean, that'd be something different. But I mean, I'm talking about like if you're just in a predicament where you're struggling with a certain sin or something, where you need to drill down on this a little bit more and get some real specifics on, hey, what kind of safeguards should I put in my life? I mean, we'd be willing to help out with that. Set up a time to talk to you on the phone or something. I would be, and I know you would too, Jody. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, man, awesome.
Cool. Also, make sure you head over, subscribe to the show so you get the episodes as they come out each week. We mentioned in the opener, man, we'd love for you to write and leave a review if you've got a few minutes to do that. That's helpful for us and encouraging, helpful for the show just in general as well. Also, head over and join the super secret podcast group. And, there's the giveaway there as well to jump in and snag that. So,
yeah, man.
Good stuff.
And our friends over at YM360, they're incredible. They're good.
Yeah, check them out.
Great
YM360.com.
You can trust them. Good stuff.
You should use the promo code LONGERHAUL. Save 20%.
There it is.
And I think that'll do it for today.
Good times, man. Awesome. Thanks, Jody.
We'll catch you guys in the next episode. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast at www.thelongerhaul.com.